Hey everybody. So today we have a very special episode for a couple reasons. First off, this is the first time I've ever interviewed someone in person who is not like far away on their own computer screen. So this is fun. And second, I think this is a topic that's going to be really, really interesting to some of you. And it's a topic I haven't talked about a lot. But we're going to dive into what it looks like to homestead when you're a teenager, or maybe you're listening to this podcast and you are in high school and maybe your parents are into homesteading, maybe they're not. But what are your options? What will that look like? And how can you move forward into this lifestyle in the future? So I have a very special guest with me today. And I actually don't think I've mentioned this setup to you, but this has been a really fun addition to our life. We have Kayla Visser now working with us here on the Homestead. So Welcome to the Homestead and to the podcast, Kayla.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who are semi-familiar with my businesses and how they are set up, you're probably familiar with Michelle. So Michelle has been on the podcast several times. Most recently, we talked about fats, lard, and tallow. She also has run my community groups, and she has helped me with various things. But Michelle is actually Kayla's mom.
Yeah.
And Kayla has been interested in homesteading for a really long time. So I'm going to let her share her story with us today. And I think it's a really cool story. It's pretty unique. And it'll be really applicable for those of you who are younger and you're interested in homesteading. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself just to kind of get started?
Sure, yeah. So I'm 21 right now. I've been interested in homesteading for, 7-8 years. Before that, I was into horses, actually. But then the horses kind of transitioned into more of like a homesteading thing when my family moved to 14 acres in New England. Before that, I had just grown up in suburbia, the suburbs of Philly, Wilmington, everything, just kind of like a quarter of an acre that you can't do anything with. Fortunately, I did grow up with a big park behind us. So we were always out in nature. We were always doing that part. And so that's always appealed to me, being outside, being in nature, all that kind of stuff. But I think homesteading really just started to make sense to me when my family moved somewhere where we had space to do something. And so initially for me, I wanted to get horses. I was excited about that. And then somewhere along the lines, horses transitioned into milk cows. I wound up getting a milk cow. But before that, I just kind of started small with stuff. So that's kind of how I got into homesteading. I don't know if that's what you were asking.
But. Yeah, no, I like that. So do you think, so let's say, 7 or 8 years ago, you were how old roughly when you started?
I was 13 when we moved to some land.
Okay. So. Did you have that, you had that interest before you got the land though? It was kind of like brewing with horses and then you had that desire.
Yes, I definitely had the desire before we owned land. There didn't feel like there was a whole lot to do with it. My grandfather did have a garden, so there was always that, we were freezing beans and that kind of stuff a little bit before we had any land at all. But so I was into the horses before we had any land at all. And then it just kind of grew, I think, when we actually had space for me to kind of do something with that. So it just kind of oozed out, I think.
What was it like were your parents into the rural lifestyle or friendly towards that? Like when you were like, I like horses, I want to do the cows, and like, what was that like for you as one of their children, you coming to them?
Yeah. So my parents have always been super supportive of anything that us girls have been into, which is fantastic. So when I kind of the horses had been there for a while. So I think when it started to manifest into other things, it wasn't like a massive shock. But they weren't, how do I say this? They weren't like into that kind of stuff really before. I kind of drugged them along at some points. But they were always very like supportive of it and like understood. So thankfully that is the case. But my mom's side does very much come from rural farming. They're all still kind of in the backwoods of West Virginia, just living off the land kind of thing. So it is there, but for their generation, that period of time, there was no form of like homesteading or farming whatsoever. So
that's a really interesting situation. I think a lot of us, whether you're younger generation or older generation, there was that gap, right? Yes. And I found that a lot with my own family. I have hardcore homesteaders, like legit in my lineage, but that boomer generation, I don't think that's quite your parents, but there's those several generations where it just completely fell off. And so now people like you and me these younger generations were picking up the torch, a lot of us. But there's some older folks doing it too, but kind of just the overall arc.
Yeah, I very much agree. Yeah.
So do you think that you can, like, when is too young to start working towards a homesteading dream? Do you think that even exists?
I think really never is too young, honestly. I think at the bare minimum, start building a work ethic. At the bare minimum, like, start working towards something, even if it can't be homesteading right now for a number of reasons. Start building, like, the ability and the desire to work, honestly. Yes. Like, I think that's huge. Being willing to work, I think, is a huge part of being successful.
Yes. So how did you cultivate that?
So I actually... Horses, actually.
Horses. They are the gateway drug for me.
So I was raising my own money and paying for riding lessons, but then which was one form of work ethic in itself. But then I found a place where I was going and I was actually working at the stable all weekend in exchange for free lessons. So I think that really kind of built in me this realization of, if I work hard, I get something for it, even at a very young age. Like, if I work hard, something will come of it. Like, for me, it was that immediate, like, free lesson. And sometimes it's not that immediate. Yeah. But if you work hard, something will come of it.
Yes. So. Yes, that was a really important lesson for me too. And my parents were supportive. Like, they weren't, like, discouraging me. And I was also horses, but I didn't know what homesteading was when I was a teenager. You're ahead of me on that, because you were already, when you were younger, you were thinking that way and I wasn't. But it was, I think that mix as a parent now, I look at my own children, it's the mix of, yeah, I love you, I support you in what you want to do, but I'm not going to give it to you on a silver platter. And there's something magic about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, so originally when I had to pay for my riding lessons, it was just because my parents couldn't afford it, like, flat out. And I always say, like, I'm so glad that was the case, because my dad especially would have just given it to me. But it was, for me, that, I think, foundation of, like, I have to work hard for what I want. And from the very beginning, I had to. And so I think that's a really important place to start, at least recognizing that hard work is needed.
Yes.
And if it's not worth it.
Yep. So absolutely. So you're doing the writing lessons. I know you had quite a few entrepreneurial adventures.
Yes.
What else did that look like as you got older and progressed through high school?
So for entrepreneurial stuff?
Yeah.
So it initially started when I was 9 is when I wanted to start doing writing lessons, and I started a dog treat business. I made just homemade, completely from scratch, all natural, which is interesting because that kind of got me into cooking too, which is a part of the whole thing. And so I started that to pay for writing lessons. And then I started to be able to not only pay for my lessons, but save up money. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, I'm just spending, a few hours a week after school kind of doing things, and it's really paying off. And so that just, I think, started that, like, fire of, like, whoa, like, this is cool. Yeah. And then later in high school, my sisters and I went through several different businesses as well. One of them was like an art thing, which was really cool. And that wound up teaching us how to program websites to an extent. It's just really cool, like, the building blocks of, like, when you start investing in really anything, but especially entrepreneurship really fires me up. You, like, learn things along the way that you didn't plan to learn at all. And that's just a part of it. So that was kind of a tangent, but there was a lot of entrepreneurial stuff kind of in my life that led me to the point where it fires me up. I love it.
Yeah. There's something connected, and I've said this before, with entrepreneurs and homestead-minded people. It's kind of the same spirit that animates both of those desires, and I think they often come together. Yeah. It's that idea of taking charge of my finances. I want something, I will earn the money to get it, and then you take charge of your food and you take charge of all these other pieces with the homestead. So
I think there's self-reliance in both of them. Yes. Like, self-reliance and self-motivation, which is a whole nother thing, I feel like. But when you have to be motivated to raise your own food or to grow a business, I think that goes hand in hand with it too, which is interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you had your businesses, you were doing the horse stuff, then your parents bought the farm. What was that like? Was that, like, the best feeling ever?
Well, it was, so we bought our land in the early spring, which in New England is kind of late, but in the early spring. And so that whole summer was literally just magic. Like, every part about it, which we also live on a lake. So that was a huge, you're 13 and live on a lake. That's just epic. Yeah. But there was a huge aspect of the homesteading that first summer too. We got there within a week. There was so much going on in the house. We were trying to, like, redo the floors and all the things. And I was like, Mom, we're digging a garden.
Yeah.
Like,
now
and
or never.
We did it. Like in New England, it is now or never for gardening.
Yes.
Which you know. But yeah, it just started, and I was like, Mom, we're just gonna dig a garden, and so we did, and we just planted stuff. A lot of stuff didn't grow that year for a lot of reasons, but we just did it, and just started. Like we just had to start somewhere, so we did. But yeah, that first summer was really fun. Really, just like imagining what could be. It was really fun.
So were you kind of the driving force for your parents? Like it's not like you're like, hey, we gotta get the garden, and I'm sure they were friendly to that idea because they just bought land, but were you kind of like saying this is next steps, and were you doing some of the research and stuff like that?
Yeah, so the research actually started before we moved, which was fun because this is a whole other story, but we knew for a long time we were moving to New Hampshire. But so yes, before we moved, we had a great library system, and that was a massive resource for me. I would literally just go and check out just stacks. I remember one specific night, my older sister and I just had books all over the family room floor, just like, oh, we could do this. Like, I didn't know this. And it was just a really exciting time. But yes, my parents were like excited about it too. They had just bought the land. It was all very new to them, but they were excited about it. And in fact, my dad is now the one that's driving a lot of this stuff now, which is really cool to see. But yeah, they were supportive of it, which if your parents aren't supportive of it is a whole different thing, because that's just hard, but there still are a lot of things you can do. I forget what your original question was though. I've just been rambling.
No, that was good. I was just asking about you driving that push towards it.
Yeah.
But they were still excited, but you were researching ahead of time, so you kind of knew what was coming next.
Yes. So I think honestly that probably is one tip if your parents aren't supportive too, is like bring them facts, like, which I did even though my parents were supportive. Like just do the research, spend the time, invest in learning.
Yes.
And I think they'll see that this can be logical. Like it doesn't have to be crazy. Yeah. I think if you have information and resources and stuff to kind of back it up, that will help your case. Whether your parents are or aren't supportive, I think that's a good thing for both of you as a younger person. So,
and that worked in my favor. So I never did convince my parents to move to the country. Like it was my number one goal as a child, and I tried so hard. And they never moved. They still haven't moved. They're still in the same house. But I was able to talk them into letting me get a horse at 14. But it was very similar. Like they knew I was committed. They knew I was consistent. I had read every book in the whole world. I had volunteered. I had done 4-H, and I was like, okay, I've done all the things. I'm going to pay for it myself. I have a job. Here's how we're going to make this happen. And they're like, I guess we can't say no anymore.
Yes.
So it was that same dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you have the logic, it's a lot harder for them to say no.
Totally. Okay, so when you were getting started as this high schooler into homesteading, which is so cool because I don't know, I'd love to know the data, the statistics. It seems like most people start homesteading when they're like, they start a family. Yeah. And then they, like for me, it was kids that made me care for the first time. I didn't really care about food and all that before. And I think that's true for a lot of folks, but you really are unique. Potentially, I think that you started so much younger. You had your books that you were checking out from the library. You were looking, what other resources did you rely on as a high schooler trying to get into this lifestyle?
Yeah, well, the internet.
The internet, yeah.
Which is actually funny. I hadn't really thought about it too much until recently, but you were actually one of the resources, which is really interesting.
Fun.
One specific thing that I know, which this is cooking and not homesteading, and a little bit of a tangent, but sausage gravy, like that's where I learned to make. So it's just, it's funny too how the kitchen all connects with it. But anyway, that is a whole other thing.
Yes.
So resources, the internet. After we moved to a really small town with a not good library system. Like I had read most of the books that they already had there, so books weren't as much of a resource for me. But the internet, I would spend a lot of time. I would usually choose a topic and just kind of dive into it. And then at some point I would get bored of that topic or want to move on. I'll just move on to something else. So like, obviously before I got a cow, it was milk cows for a long time. And then I knew that we had a lot of wooded area, which we do. So I wanted to utilize that. So it was like, okay, what can we do with that? So that was kind of a unit study, if you want to call it that. So that's kind of how I would just dive into one topic and then dive into another one. And then just kind of overall, it turned into a big picture thing where at the time there were focuses, but overall it was like a big picture thing, which was really cool to kind of step back and see that at some point, that it all kind of added up and worked together. So,
and it's interesting, as I've been doing research for my book that I'm writing, one thing that keeps coming up as kind of a trait of successful people is curiosity.
Yes.
It's that just insatiable curiosity.
Yep.
Who cares what it is?
Doesn't matter.
Get into it. Just
Doesn't
dive
matter.
in and follow that. And that is
Definitely.
definitely a trait of people who get what they want in life. I mean, and that can look totally different for everybody, but that's a big marker.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because I grew up homeschooled, and one thing that my mom said all the time was, one of my main goals for you is for you to learn, but mostly for you to love learning.
Yes.
Because if you love learning, that will happen your whole life. Like, you're going to be with me for a small period of time as a homeschooled kid, but when you go out into the world, I want you to love learning so that learning will continue forever. So that's just keep learning, keep loving learning.
Yeah. Amen. I know for me, because it's kind of cool. We're both homeschooled kids now, and we're both Homestead people.
Yeah.
That was the same for me. I think the bulk of like what I've learned and attained and done as an adult has come from continuing that self-led learning process as I've gotten older. Like right now, I'm researching for this manuscript and I'm reading books on psychology, like college textbooks on psychology, which, 10 years ago I'd have been like, you couldn't pay me to read that. But it's that following that curiosity, and it's leading me down some really cool paths. And so it's that keeping that love of learning in there is so key. It's so key.
Yes.
Whether you're homeschooling your kids or not homeschooling them, I think
it applies everywhere, like literally everywhere. No matter what you're doing, if you love learning, you're gonna go somewhere. Like you're gonna learn something at least.
Yes, absolutely. You will. Sometimes it's not what not to do, but you will learn something.
Yes, very true.
Yes. Okay, cooking. Let's talk about cooking, because I know that was a thread. How did that incorporate into this?
So, cooking, I love to cook for a really long time. I actually remember when I was around 9. So I have 2 older sisters and 1 younger. And the 2 older sisters, I was around 9. I was really interested in cooking. I was in the kitchen a lot. I was cooking, if my brain serves me correctly, pretty much full meals around like 9, 10. And my 2 older sisters weren't really into it at all, which now they are, obviously that happens. Mm-hmm. But, and so mom had this, like a summer challenge basically. And one of the things was for my 2 older sisters to cook a full meal for our family. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm already doing that. Like, it's not that hard, which like, not to put them down. I was just in a different place and had different interests. But, so yeah, I didn't feel too young to be doing it at the time. And obviously I wasn't, but looking back, I'm like, most kids my age were not even interested in that. And then at some point it kind of transitioned into, I was cooking most of my family's meals. Which the nice thing is when you're a kid, you can just be like, Mom, I'm not cooking tonight.
Yeah, for sure.
But, which we don't really have that luxury as much as adults.
No.
But yeah, so canine cookies. So like my dog treat business started a lot of it. That got me into the kitchen. And obviously that was different because it was baking and it was just different. But I think that kind of got me into the kitchen and kind of empowered me and made me realize like, oh, I can do a lot of things in the kitchen. And then at some point, I just started cooking. I can't remember exactly. But then it was cool that I had already enjoyed being in the kitchen when I got into homesteading. And then I remember I had been into homesteading for quite a while when it kind of struck me, these go exactly together. Like, I just remember having this light bulb moment of like, they go together. Like, if you don't like being in the kitchen, the rest of it is, and vice versa, it's kind of burdensome on both ends if you don't enjoy the other one. So it's just really cool how I kind of had a background in being interested in the kitchen and loving that. And then obviously that transitioned into more like from scratch stuff when I got more into homesteading and realizing that food was so important, and they just really tied together. So just another one of those things where when you follow something that you're curious and passionate about, you never know how that's going to equip you for something later that you don't even know you're going to be interested in. So follow your passions, I guess.
Absolutely. And just pull out, you said something about cooking being burdensome and how it goes together. And I was thinking, someone who's watching or listening to this, I hear a lot of people say, I hate cooking. It's drudgery. I don't enjoy it. And that's totally, that's fine because we all have different interests. But one thing I've noticed for me, because I used to think the same thing. I didn't like to cook as a high school. I could make a pie because my mom forced me to figure out how to make a pie.
Funny thing is, I still can't make a pie.
That's funny. We're good parenting. But I did not cook but for the joy of it. But what made me interested in cooking was when I got into homesteading more. Like, for some reason, making a cake from a box didn't feel exciting. Like, that was boring and just blah to me then and now. But when I was making a cake from scratch and I was doing this chemistry and I was bringing forth the cake from flour and water and eggs, it was this is magic. And I feel really good about myself because I'm doing cool stuff. So I think there's an element where maybe a lot of people think they hate cooking because they're doing the modern processed version, which is boring. Like there's no magic in microwaving something.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good. It's empty.
Which again, I think is coming back to the curiosity aspect a lot of it too. Like there is an aspect of the curiosity and the passion and that kind of thing in the kitchen too. Like when you can see something come from nothing, like there is like a curiosity and a wonder kind of component in that, which is just kind of interesting that it all just comes back around. I guess
it's all connected. It's all connected. So you got your cow.
Yes.
Did you fund the cow yourself with your
Entrepreneurial? I did. So I had actually saved up from my dog treat business, which is crazy that I was like 9 and 11 and 12 and making enough money that I actually saved up enough that eventually it bought a milk cow. Like that's just kind of crazy to me. And it didn't feel that crazy at the time, but looking back, it's like, okay. But yeah, so I did fund that. And fencing is expensive. It's really expensive. Even more expensive now, but anyways. So it was a pretty small pasture and we had to supplement with a lot of hay and all that kind of stuff. So that was expensive too, but yeah, I was able to fund it and I did babysitting and other kind of stuff at the time because I wasn't as entrepreneurial at that time. I was more focused on homesteading and obviously I was in high school, so that was keeping me busy and a couple jobs that I had and that kind of stuff. So I wasn't as entrepreneurial at that time, but still able to work hard and fund my own passions, which was great. So yeah, that was a really, really cool time.
Yeah. So how did it work? I mean, you had horse lessons, so you were familiar with some large animals, but one thing I see tripping up a lot of folks, so they get nervous about is, they have a dog and a cat, and they go from that to a cow.
Yeah.
And that's intimidating because it's a large animal, they can be dangerous. So how did that work for you as a kid who was now owning a milk cow and dealing with a milk cow?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not fully sure that I know the answer. I tend to just jump into stuff, which I had moments once I had bought her that I was like, this should not have happened. And my dad did have to get involved, sometimes. And I watched YouTube videos and did what I could to prepare myself for having that large animal. And like you said, I was familiar with horses, but cows are different.
Yeah, they're different.
But I think also I just wound up with a really good cow.
Okay.
That was a big part of it too. I didn't even mean to. Yeah. And she was a heifer, which is interesting because looking back, that should have been a problem.
Yeah.
But she was just a really calm, and she was a Holstein too, so that was kind of funny too. But she was just a really good cow. She was, so I think that was a big part of it. But I also just stayed calm. Staying calm is a big part of it too, I think, with large animals and with life in general.
Yes.
Because once I had jumped in, I was like, okay, I'm committed. I'm going to figure this out. There's no point in getting excited about things. So it is tough. It is hard. Do prepare yourself, but at some point you do have to jump in.
Yes, absolutely.
And even when it's the right thing, you'll feel like you're making a mistake sometimes too, especially when you're 15 and, it's hard. But once you jumped in, it does feel better, I think.
Totally. Action cures fear, I think, a lot of the time. I mean, you still have some fear, but it's better. Trust us, it gets better.
Yeah.
So had she been milked?
She had not.
So you were breaking the cow, you were getting her, okay, that's a big jump.
My younger sister was a big part of it because I always had someone with me, we were just a team, which is so helpful. If you can find anyone who supports you, will be your team, do it. Find that person because that's massive. Even just the mental and moral support, you need it. So she was a big part of that too because we were always just together and figuring stuff out together. But yeah, she had not been milked. You
were starting from scratch.
Yeah, I'm looking back at so many things right now. This was crazy. Yeah. But no, she was calm. Obviously, I'd read 10 books. That can only prepare you so much for physical things, but it does really help because even sometimes when you're in the middle of something like dealing with a large animal, you have that knowledge to pull back from, which I think is a point if you're younger and your parents don't support this, or no matter what stage of life you're in, if you can't be jumping in as much as you want, filling your brain with that knowledge is a massive part of being successful later. Even if you think I'm just reading a book, yes, you are, but you're also equipping yourself. Yeah. You're just really building a foundation that you never know how you'll be able to pull from that later. So
absolutely. And it's that combination, I think, because people make fun of book smarts a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And I agree. Yeah, there's, like you said, there's something you can't duplicate from just doing the thing and touching it and being there.
Yep.
But I still pull on books. Yesterday, we were planting trees. And I'm not used to planting fruit trees. That'll be another episode. I'll tell you more about that. But I'm planting these fruit trees. I don't know what I'm doing. So I had the book out there next to my shovel, like, and I'd be like, stop, I'm gonna read this section on how deep can we plant. Because like I was doing the action, but I still needed the book to give me some guidance. So I had no shame in doing that. I did it all the time.
Yesterday is actually a really good example of that.
Yeah. The book out there next to the dirt.
Yep. So you gotta have both.
You gotta have both. Yeah. And I think either one alone gets you in trouble sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. But if you can only do one, I think it will still help you with the other one.
Absolutely. So did you have mentors? Like, I got your sister helping you. Did you have any other mentors in real life besides the internet?
You know, I really didn't. We had one neighbor who would raise a few beef cows every year. So he kind of knew about cows a little bit. And I would talk to him. He actually goes to our church. So I would talk to him, about things every once in a while. He knew generally about cows. But really, I didn't, which would have been really helpful to have someone just like come over and come beside me. And I think that would have been really helpful, but I just kind of figured things out.
But you did it anyway, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Because I think, if you have it, it's great, but sometimes we don't. Like, I didn't have a Homestead mentor when I started. I was just like,
sometimes you just don't.
You just don't. It depends, Okay, so I get emails every so often from 14 and 15-year-olds they sound like super cool individuals, and they read the blog and they are listening to podcasts, and they're like, I am so into this, and I'm saving up for land at a homestead when I graduate. Kind of like, tell me next steps, or what do I expect? What would you tell those people?
Let me think. Do what you can, I think, which like has kind of been the theme of this so far.
Yeah.
But like for me, I am very much like I want to just do something big and do it now. Mm-hmm. But a lot of circumstances in my life have forced me to like sit in the waiting for really long periods of time for different things, which sounds like it couldn't be that long because I'm only 21, but it feels really, really long when you're sitting in it. And one thing that I've learned is you can either use the waiting or you can waste it. Yeah. And no matter, I think, what stage you're in, you're always going to be waiting for something. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, that's one thing that I've just realized. I think you're always going to be waiting for something. So whether you have the perfect scenario or whether you don't, use the time. And I can't tell each individual, like, unless I analyze each individual thing. And even then I couldn't tell you, like, each individual situation. Mm-hmm. Like, tell you how best to use your time, but find a way to use your time. Yeah. Whether it's just building that work ethic, which sometimes is just working at McDonald's, sometimes that's what it is. And sometimes that's what you got to do. Or whether that's spending every waking second reading about what you're passionate about, whatever it is, I would just say use your time to help equip yourself for the future, whatever that looks like for you. I can't tell you what that looks like for you, and it's not going to look like it did for me. It's going to look different for everybody, but use your time, use your waiting, use it well. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Advice. I think for anyone, not even if not in high school, full-grown adult, that's great advice.
Yeah, but I think when you're younger, it does feel longer.
It does. I remember that feeling. Yeah, like if I would have known, I remember how bad I wanted land and horses and the life I have now, and in my own understanding when I was 15 and 16, and to know that now I have it and I've been there, done that, like I would have never believed that. Like it felt like it was never, ever, ever, ever gonna happen.
No, I agree. I mean, even just being here, I've been like, holy cow, so much of what I wanted I have right now. Yeah. And so I think maybe that's one other thing I would say is like, the waiting will probably make it eventually better what you do have. But not only that, whenever you do have what you used to want, take time to appreciate that. Like, it sounds like weird almost to say, but like sometimes just look around you. Even if you are just working at McDonald's building that work ethic, look around you and be like, I'm working towards something, and appreciate that. And I think your attitude changes a lot too.
Absolutely. So where do you see homesteading? How do you see it fitting into your life in the future? I mean, you're 21. You've already graduated college, right?
Yep.
So, and you've already you've been around doing different jobs. So you've already seen a lot of life for a 21-year-old, which is kind of a testament to, I think, how your mom set your homeschool up, which is a whole other topic of homeschooling high schoolers, which I can't speak to because I haven't done it yet. Maybe I'll have to have Michelle back on. But it was so cool that she had you guys really kind of set to launch when you turned 18 pretty much, right? So you could go and see the world. How did that, or is that how do you describe that?
I think you asked me 2 questions.
I think I did. I think I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you at the same time.
So yes, I think I was very equipped in a lot of ways, but in a lot of other ways, I still just go and experience things.
Yes.
Which I think is amazing that one of my mom's goals was to equip me for whatever I wanted to go do. But I still had to so I had a lot of really good foundation, but I still had to go and like build on that.
Sure.
And I still do. Obviously, I still do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did just have to go and do some things. And that was a big part of, and I think it still is a big part of what I'm going to do in the future or where I am now. I think in the future.
I mean, that's a hard question.
It is a hard question. I don't know. I see myself with some land somewhere.
Yeah.
I think, like, this isn't a passion that I can get rid of.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, I have no clue what the future holds, really.
Yeah.
And honestly, right now, I'm really present, which is great. I've always been a very, like, futuristic kind of person. And so you're asking me that, and it's kind of funny because I feel like a year ago, I would have had a whole list of things. Sure. But right now, I'm just kind of trying to be here. But in, like, the things that I've had passion for in the past will always be there, and I think they'll always continue to grow, which I don't know if that makes any sense.
No,
but
absolutely.
I just think that it's not going to stop. Like, it's just...
Yep. They're in there. You're just going to keep following and see what happens. Yeah. I like it. Last question. What would you tell little 9-year-old Kayla? What advice would you give her?
So I was saying I didn't know what advice to give to just anyone, but to myself, I think I'd say something similar to what I wound up saying, like, use the waiting, which I did in some ways. But in other ways, I look back and I'm like, there was still so much wasted time. And I think for me, at least, like, talking to myself, I got really wrapped up in the waiting, I think, like, feeling like, woe is me, I can't have what I want right now, which I think we all have those moments, but I was just very dramatic about it sometimes, I think. So I would say things will happen, first of all. Second of all, even if they don't, which I can now tell you they will, even if they don't, just keep using your time for something. Like, I don't know, that sounds really basic.
No, but there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, yeah. Like,
you are completely in charge of how you use your time.
Yes.
Not only that, but you're also completely in charge of your responses to things, your attitude towards things, your emotions about things. Like, you're in charge of all those things. And I think the sooner you realize that you are in charge of those things, and you should be in charge of those things, and you should want to take charge of those things, like, how you respond to things is huge.
Yeah.
And how you deal with things and how you look at things emotionally, I think that's huge. So I think I tell myself, use your time, and what would I say?
I hear you saying a lot around, like, taking ownership.
Yeah.
Like, taking ownership of what you can do and your finances. Even if you're a kid and you want something, go earn the money and take charge of your time and take charge of your responses. And that message of higher levels of responsibility is one that is disappearing in our culture, which is why I think your trajectory is so different than the average 21-year-old, because you have an old-fashioned mindset that a lot of, maybe you don't even realize it, but that a lot of people don't have. And I think that, we're all different. It's not that we all have to be the same, but I think there's a lot of power in taking that ownership and taking that responsibility.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately how we get what we want.
Yeah.
We step up.
And I think it's important to, when you realize that you can essentially govern yourself and when you realize that, you realize that sitting back and just saying, woe is me, no matter what you're doing or why you're feeling that way, is not going to help you.
No.
And so I think when you realize that not only do you have control of yourself, but you should want to, and you should want to take charge of that, I think it just does a lot of good.
A whole lot, yeah. A lot of wisdom there. So, anything else that we missed? Anything else you want to add?
Probably. I don't know.
I'm sure we'll think about it when we go at lunch. We'll think of it.
Well, maybe one thing that I should say, which is going to sound random after all the rants we've gone on, but you don't have to homeschool to have this mentality, because I know we talked about homeschooling a lot, and I know for parents and kids often they're like, oh, well, I go to public school or private school or whatever it is, and so you feel kind of trapped by that. But I think that applies under all the rest of the boxes. Do what you can, take charge, and do something.
Absolutely.
Do what you can.
Yes.
So
homeschool or public school, it all is the same. Yeah, totally.
So that was kind of random, but
yeah. Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
This is super fun.
Yeah.
We don't get to talk about this stuff when we're planting trees.
I know. So, well, we don't think to talk about it.
I mean, we could, but we were sweating too much yesterday to talk much of anything.
Yeah.
So, speaking of trees, we'll talk about that in a future episode. But anyway, you'll probably see Kayla in some of the videos. She's been helping me with hopefully some upcoming YouTube stuff, and she's been helping me with the beef business and helping me all kinds of things. So she has been so awesome to have around. You'll see more of her. Thanks for doing this. This was super fun. Of course. So I know it's going to be really inspiring for a lot of people.
Hopefully. I don't know how inspiring I am, but hopefully you can get something from it, whoever you are.
More than you think, for sure.